Welcome to another episode. This time I'd like to do something different and talk about what it takes to learn Hung Gar. This is based on my own experience teaching people over the years and also of learning and being with other students throughout all my life. The first thing I'd like to do is to mention that what I'm about to talk about here are my own ideas and concepts. And I don't make any claim that what I'm going to say is necessarily comprehensive, precise, or indeed agreed to by the whole community. And any comments and suggestions are always welcome if anybody wants to mention anything. First, I'd like to look at the considerations behind student development. And before I mention those particular points, it's important to realize that the learning timeline and how fast you may progress vary significantly amongst different students. It depends on the individual's own capabilities, and not just physical capabilities, but also cognitive capabilities to be able to understand what's going on, and also their approach to training, their motivation, and how much time they're prepared to put in, their degree of fitness. And also very important is their own self-discipline. So with that in mind, it's important to realize that every student is unique. Everybody is of varying ages and backgrounds and comes with a different set of skills and experiences, different state of health, different body shapes, and different capabilities. The commitment that one needs to put in is significant to learn a traditional martial arts like Hung Gar. And also one's intention must be in sync with what it is you're learning and the intentions behind how you're being taught, and does it match up with what you expect to get out of it. So your expectations are extremely important to consider. And also your degree of perseverance. It requires significant perseverance to learn Hung Gar. Let me start by just briefly going over what is traditional Kung Fu. To me, I see it as a personal discovery, and through the experience of learning and performing the art, we have a connection to ourselves. And this is in contrast to the contemporary society in which we live. You must remember you're learning a 300-year-old art form, and the circumstances around how that was developed and been passed on are quite different than today's circumstances. So what is traditional Kung Fu? The word Kung Fu is actually broadly translated as achievement through great effort. And it requires motivation and a lot of self-discipline to make that achievement. It requires considerable hard work to condition the body and build up endurance and stamina, and also to have a strong will to succeed. It's primarily a path and a process towards self-improvement. And I say that as opposed to it being a tool simply to be used for fighting and confrontation. And it also represents knowing all about yourself and also conquering oneself. So we all have our particular habits and idiosyncrasies and frustrations. And it's important to understand what they are and to conquer those things before we can go on and learn effectively traditional Kung Fu. Now, I would say this, what I've said so far, applies to many things in life, not just martial arts, but particularly most sports. And I think people will understand and relate to what it is they're doing in their life and to see that these things are particularly important. It can also be in your work life and academic life to get through, to have some of these qualities in order to progress. So let me just go forward. I'm not going to talk about these things in detail. Let me go forward, and if I look at the particular students that I've had over time that have effectively learned the whole style and excelled in what they've done. And I would say they have all of these qualities and their capability factors would fit into these categories. And if I just go quickly through them, I think you'll understand. And again, this not only will apply to martial arts, but perhaps to many other things. So because martial arts is a physical thing, it's important that we have a degree of fitness. We need some strength. It doesn't mean that we have to have big muscles and be super strong athletes. We have to have the right personality. And that means you're not learning something to go and fight with everybody and make trouble. You need to have the motivation, as I've mentioned before. You need to understand what the Hung Gar technique is and the meaning behind everything you're doing and its purpose. A degree of fighting prowess, certainly understanding or having a strategy behind fighting and how you're going to use what it is that you've learned. High degree of discipline, which I've already emphasized. You need to be flexible because you're going to be learning different things if you consider the many different weapons, the long weapons, the short weapons, the heavy weapons, the soft weapons. It's not all about punching and kicking. And body shape and size is important. You will notice that people of a certain body size will play differently to other people. If they're particularly large, they will be playing quite different to someone who's quite skinny. You have to have the right sort of intentions behind what it is you're doing and how you're going about learning. Yes, you need a degree of power and speed. You have to have the right posture and have the right spirit behind what it is you're doing. And certainly a degree of agility to be able to move around. Now, as I say, I'm not going to talk through all these things, but you may just want to bear these things in mind as you go through the years of learning, because you're going to come to face many of these things and determine how you're going to deal with each of these. Now, I've put together here what I call a capability and maturity model. I see it as a framework for student development. And what I've done is I've got 5 levels of maturity, starting with ad hoc, or what I also call beginning, and moving along to basic. And another word I'm using for that is experiencing. You're beginning to experience things. And then the intermediate level, you're now understanding what training is all about. And then at the advanced level, you're developing a degree of competence. And at the mastery level, you become quite accomplished in what it is that you've learned. And each of those maturity levels apply to a particular capability that is absolutely essential in learning, in being able to learn and improving yourself in Hung Gar. And again, I emphasize it probably applies to many different types of sports and training, and even perhaps learning other things like musical instruments and so on. So let's now move across looking at the capabilities. The first capability is to acquire an understanding of what is Hung Gar and what it is you're doing and what are the movements all about. So there's a cognitive process, a realization that you're learning these things because they have certain purpose. And then if we move along to the next one is sustain the knowledge. So yes, we begin to understand things, we begin to learn things. And how do we sustain that? How do we retain that knowledge and use what it is that we've learned so far to build and get more knowledge so that we become more competent and more accomplished in the acquisition and maintenance of knowledge. And the next one moving along is acquiring and developing the skill. So just having an understanding and having the knowledge doesn't mean you necessarily have the skill. We can sit down and pass some sort of academic exam with understanding and knowledge, but it doesn't mean we have the skill to execute these particular things. So that becomes a very important capability to acquire. How do we get that capability, and how do we develop it to become more and more skillful to a very accomplished level? And then the last one is the mastery of the skill. So we've developed the skill, we understand how to do it, and actually how do we master that skill in terms of it becomes second nature to us? And that requires some particular thought and knowledge and understanding of how to do that. So I'm going to use this model, which I call the capability maturity model, as the framework for a student to develop in Hung Gar. And as I begin to explain it, I think you'll see what it all means and how it can be useful for you. I'd like to start off by mentioning, as I have alluded before, that every student is unique. And so students will be at different degrees of understanding and knowledge and skill all the time. And they'll may leapfrog each other, and some of them may go backwards before they go forwards. And all sorts of things apply when we're dealing with people and we're learning a traditional martial art. The other thing to understand that I think is very important is the Sifu's role, or the teacher's role. The role is to teach and help and guide the student so that the student can continually progress and develop and improve in their expertise in this capability and maturity journey. And I often say to my students that my role is to make you better than you were when you came to class today. And if you keep doing that, and if I keep doing that, then in the end, you're going to improve substantially. So let's first look at a typical beginner, if there is such a thing. And I emphasize again, every student is unique. But let's take a beginner who knows nothing about the topic and see what sort of capability and maturity level they typically may enter learning Hung Gar with. The first thing to bear in mind is many of the beginners will have no transferable skills. Some will, but many won't. For example, you may get a beginner who has done something else, whether he's played squash or football or tennis or taekwondo or something. And so obviously they're going to come with some understanding But you also may get a lot of beginners who have done nothing. And particularly if you're teaching children, this tends to be the case. So let's look at the typical beginner without any transferable skill.